we're here today with Paul Young, the author of The Shack. And man, that's just an amazing book.
Thank you.
And we were just sharing just a while ago, my wife asked me about that book about, I guess, a year ago. And you had given me that book in a conference.
Yeah, which I don't remember, but I did remember your face. I thought, I've seen this guy before somewhere.
And so she's like, have you read this book? This is an amazing book. Two of my friends read this book. And I'm like, no, but I have it. She's like, you bought the book? I said, no, the author gave it to me. She goes, no. I said, yeah, the author gave it to me. Did he sign it? I said, I didn't even look to see if he signed it. So
and here we are.
There we are. And you didn't sign it, by the way. So
oh, man.
I'm going to get
signing is kind of, especially for me, because I'm not like a real author, you know. So it's taken me a while to sort of get used to it. So
yeah.
I've had to find ways to sort of redeem it.
Redeem the signing process.
Yeah, because it's kind of goofy. If you think about it, you know, signing a book.
I know.
Okay.
Well, I signed some of Bill's books.
Well, good. Maybe you could sign some of mine.
You wrote this book, and you just said, I'm not an author. I'm like I'm like, this book is like #1 New York bestseller. It's in Walmart. I mean, you have made Walmart and Costco.
And guess what? I've been on at least 5 crossword puzzles.
That's
Is that
amazing.
great or what? I know. And I was on a question on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
Really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So that's when you know you've made it. Yeah.
So what do you attribute the success of this book to?
The Holy Spirit. I mean, I couldn't have done this. I've never published anything in my life. I never tried to, never thought about it. And this was just in response to something that my wife Kim wanted me to do. She wanted me to write something for the kids because, as she said, because the way you think is so outside the box, it would be a great gift for the kids.
So you wrote this book originally not to be published.
No, I didn't even think about publishing it.
And you wrote it for your children.
Yep, and I have 6 kids. My youngest is almost 16. My oldest is 28.
Oh my goodness, you guys are like rabbits.
Well, we figured out what it was. Yeah, rutabagas. Cut the rutabagas out. We haven't had a child since.
And so you wrote this book. How long between the time that you finished the book, because you actually just wrote it for your kids, and you published the book, how long, what distance was that?
Well, 2005 was when I first started writing it, and I wanted to get it done by Christmas, and I actually did, but we didn't have any money to actually print it for them until after Christmas. So the first and only intended run was 15 copies at Office Depot, and so I gave 6 to my kids, and Kim got 1, and a couple cousins in Canada, and then the rest went to friends. And that was after Christmas 2005. And then it got out of hand. My friends kept giving it away, and finally I sent it to the only for real author I knew, guy that writes books on purpose.
Yeah.
And because I didn't know what to do. I was getting the responses in emails and things like that were just so unusual.
Yes.
And it was all happening word of mouth. People giving it to people that they cared about.
So by then, I assume that you were like self-publishing it or something.
No, I wasn't doing anything. I went down and got another 15 copies at Office Depot.
Oh, okay.
And then, but I ended up with a group of 3 guys. 2 of them were movie producers, who, when they read it, saw it as a potential film. This is in 2006, and so we got it ready because they thought a good interim step would be to publish the book so that they could. Maybe in 5 years we could get to 100,000 copies, and that opens up the door for a movie. Me, I'm going along with it because I have no clue what I'm doing anyway, and so what happened is that we got it ready. 26 publishers turned it down.
That was the question I was going to ask you. Yeah. I heard that several publishers turned the book down.
26, half of them faith-based, half of them not faith-based.
What was the reason why they I'm sure there was 10 different reasons, but what was
No, actually it was only a couple. The faith-based folks, the ones who even responded, said, it's too edgy. We don't have a niche for it. Our A-list authors are going to be upset that we would publish something like this, and our constituents will probably not like it. So they said that they thought it was too edgy, and the secular mainstream publishers thought it had too much Jesus in it. Same thing. We don't have a niche for it. It's got too much Jesus. If you could just take Jesus out, And I'm thinking, well, that's kind of a waste. because that's sort of what the whole thing's about, you know. And so we were stuck between edgy and Jesus, and I'm going, how hard is it to publish a book? So two of the guys, Brad and Wayne, created a publishing company. So technically, I'm not self-published. I have a two-man publishing company behind me, and now they're doing other things because they own that publishing company. But it was created to publish The Shack, and we went to a local printer in L.A. He drop-shipped 10,000 books, actually 11,000, to Brad's garage in May of '07. And we set up a website so that people could actually buy the book. And here's the miracle. We went through that garage and 2 storage units and the local printer. Over the next 13 months, we shipped over 1 million books and spent less than $300 in marketing and advertising.
Oh my goodness.
It was all word of mouth. It was all people giving it to people they care about.
That is crazy.
It is totally crazy. It's
has that ever happened
no,
in history?
Not in the history
in
of
publishing history?
Nope. And there's secular agnostic publishers now going, this is a God thing.
And did you so you didn't really have a publisher. You started your own publishing company.
Yeah, the 2 guys did. I didn't.
Okay. And did they do anything like I understand it was Jesus, so I get that part.
Yeah.
But was there any kind of strategy that you used to get this book out?
No. The thing that helped,
nothing at all?
Well, what kicked it off was that Brad and Wayne have a podcast that goes out to 150 countries, 45 minutes a week. And they just talk about Jesus stuff, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't created, it was already in effect before The Shack ever showed up. But while we're working on getting the book ready for publishing, you know, the concepts of The Shack are infiltrating into their podcast, and I get interviewed on it a couple times. And because of that, we pre-sold 1,000 copies.
Okay.
So those 1,000 went out, bam. And then we gave a bunch away to our friends.
Yeah, of course.
And that's all. That is all we did. We think it's like $246 that Brad spent on an internet ad that we don't know if it even ran. He said it was a total waste of money. But that's all the money that we spent on marketing and advertising. And everything else just, after that, people started showing up, and in 4 months we were running out of books, the first 11,000.
Were you, like, did the Lord talk to you about that was going to happen, or were you totally shocked?
Totally shocked. Totally shocked. I mean, by that point in my own healing process, you know, I live like a child. That is, I get grace for one day, and everything's an adventure. And I believe God's involved in the details of our lives.
Totally.
And so, you know, when I look back on even the writing of the book, I'm writing it for the right reasons. I'm not doing it because I have an identity as an author. I'm not doing it because I'm thinking, oh, if I could just do this, then we could earn some money, or, you know, none of those things were a part of it. It was just a gift for my children.
And you sort of said in the beginning you didn't have money to even print this book.
I was working 3 jobs the whole time. And I even worked up until a year ago this February. I was still working, shipping out soldering tips and cleaning toilets in a little manufacturer's rep warehouse.
I would imagine that this book has increased your salary significantly.
Yeah, and I don't have to work 3 jobs.
Yeah.
I know, it is. And now we've got a whole new set of things that we need the wisdom of God about, you know, that we didn't before.
Yeah, I know that well.
But, you know, our security wasn't in what this book has done. The book hasn't changed anything for us that matters, because everything that matters to us was in place before I wrote this. And if it all went away, I'd be fine, because I have the presence.
I bet the publishers have come back and tried to get
They did. And actually, you know, the book has sort of rocked the publishing industry a bit, because they can't believe they missed it. And so it's caused a lot of them to rethink some of their screening processes and opening up to more divergent kinds of things. So that's been really positive. So the industry as a whole has responded very well to the shock of this, because it really has shocked the industry and the world.
That's just amazing.
It's crazy.
Now, is this book, we know the book is fiction, of course.
Uh-huh.
But
it's true, it's just not real.
That's what I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
I've kind of heard that this is your story.
In many ways, yes. And see, I'm writing it for my kids, so they're in it, and our camping trip to Eastern Oregon is in it, and you know, Nan is a lot like Kim, and I mean, it's all woven in there. And I took the pain of my own great sadness and I shifted it a bit, and I picked a scenario that is really painful for those who haven't read the book. The first 5 chapters are really wrenching.
Yeah.
They're not graphic, but they're very wrenching. And I use that as the backdrop because it asks the best questions. When I'm writing this, I'm thinking, you know, here are the questions in my life I wasn't allowed to ask as a religious kid growing up, you know? And I want to try to communicate these things to my kids. I'm going to try to, how can we live in a world that is so difficult at times with such, and we perpetrate such evil against one another.
Yeah.
And there's a God who's good all the time.
Yeah.
You know, and how do those things go together?
Totally.
And, yeah, and what's the issues of pain in our life, and what's the process of healing like? And all of those kinds of elements are all wrapped up in, and who is this God? You know, because the God I grew up with is not like the God in the shack. And that's because I've had 50 years of coming to healing where all those monster God, idol God caricatures are gone. Religion didn't heal my life, and the God of those religions never healed my life. It was a God who is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, who is intensely relational and has relentless affection towards us.
The black woman in the book.
Yes. Papa, who is God the Father.
And you depicted
as a large black African American woman.
Why?
A lot of reasons. You got to remember
a couple of those stories. I've heard a couple rumors of why.
Yeah. Well, you have to remember, I'm writing this for my children. So I'm not thinking the whole world's going to read this. So I can use whatever I want to use to try to communicate what I'm trying to. And they're going to love me anyway.
Totally.
Right? So the large black African American woman comes partly from my own history. See, I'm a missionary kid. I'm a third culture kid. I grew up overseas. I grew up in a black culture in the highlands of New Guinea. Tribal, spirit worshipping, cannibalistic. I was 10 months old when we
Cannibalistic.
Yeah, not for food, you know, but for ritual. And I mean, they practiced it while we were there. And changes your idea of finger food, that's for sure.
That's bad.
I know.
That's bad.
I'm sorry.
Don't put that in the book.
Oh no. But so, you know, I grew up in a culture that is, I mean, for real. I didn't understand consciously that I was white until I went to boarding school at 6. And but I grew up and they raised me. I grew up Donnie. You know, I was the first person to really understand their language, and I was the Wycliffe informant when I was 5 years old when they came in to translate it. And but you know, my dad was a very angry man. He's represented in the book by Mackenzie's father. I'm Mackenzie, and Mackenzie, you know, his healing process, he's got to go back to the center of all of his pain, into his own house of the soul, as it were, to deal with his crap. And Papa shows up in a way that bypasses the problems he has with his own father, which he has then plastered on the face of God. And
superimposed.
Yeah. And so God looks like our abusers, or he looks like our fathers who were there and violent, or who weren't there at all.
Don't you think that really is the story of the way the world sees God right now?
Absolutely.
Because of the way that the church has portrayed God?
And religion has. And it doesn't matter what religion it is.
That's what I mean, yeah.
Yeah. And so, you know, I get asked fairly frequently by the secular press about books like Dawkins, you know, against the idea that there is a God.
Yeah.
You know, and they say, what do you think about that? And I say, well, I agree with him. You know, the God that he believes doesn't exist, I don't believe exists either. You know, he's attacking the monster idol religious God that we grew up with.
Yeah.
And I found out over my lifetime that God doesn't exist either. And so, you know, the use of Papa, because God's not male or female, and so I was tampering with the paradigms, because I don't want my kids growing up with Gandalf with an attitude. Right?
You were definitely messing with the paradigms.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is that people know theologically, even within the Christian community, that Scripture does not teach that God is a male. that
Yeah.
he is spirit.
Or that he's human.
Well, yeah, except the person of Jesus,
Jesus, of
who is
course.
God.
Yeah.
And but still, that God is neither male nor female. God is spirit, and he's not like 51% male and 49% female, and that we're made in the image of God, male and female. And so, there's plenty of imagery in Scripture for both. The problem is that we must realize that imagery is always going to be inadequate. Imagery
Exactly.
is a bridge to help us understand the character and nature of God.
That's right.
It's not a definition. And
Oh,
I had my first picketers last week in Orlando, and guys with the mega bullhorns and stuff.
Really?
Yeah, it was a hot day like here, and so I took them bottles of water, and after a while, one of them says, "So, are you one of the pastors here?" Because I was speaking at a big church there. And I said, "No." He said, "Well, who are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm the guy that wrote the book you're mad about." And which surprised him. But not one of them had read it. Not one of them. Not one of the picketers had read the book. But one of them asked me the question. They said, "Do you really believe that God is a large black African American woman?" And what I wanted to say is, "Do you believe that God has a penis?" I mean, come on.
Totally.
It's a great question, because what is your image of God?
That's
and what
right.
kind of box have you put God in?
Yeah.
Because we've made him white, Anglo-Saxon, grandfatherly, and angry.
Yeah. Or whatever our culture idolizes.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
So-
or is afraid of. I think more
afraid of,
or
yeah.
more what they're afraid of.
Yeah. So in Proverbs, he's depicted as a woman.
Sure. Proverbs 8.
Wisdom.
Wisdom is Sophia.
That's right.
Yep. And there's plenty of other scriptures for God pictured as in female terminology.
But that one image of God being a black African woman, probably, maybe is that your greatest criticism of the book?
Oh, criticism is that is probably in the West. Western culture it is. That criticism's never popped up anywhere else in the world so far.
It hasn't?
No.
I think it's amazing.
Thank you.
I love it.
Well, because it tampers with something that just shocks us enough to say, wait a second, what kind of box have I put God in?
Totally.
And that moves us outside. I don't want to lose the imagery of God as Father, and people who have read the book realize that Mackenzie still has to deal with God as Father at some point in the book.
Yes.
But initially, he can't. He can't even relate in any kind of positive way because of his own relationship with his dad. And so that's the beauty of the incarnation. God will find a way to get to us. Jesus says, "I'll leave the 99 to go find the one. And you're the one, and I'm the one." And he knows we're lost. Romans says nobody even seeks for God.
Totally.
Which means that it's God who comes to us. That's the story of the incarnation. That's the beauty of the kind of relational God who pursues us, knowing our inability to pursue him.
Since you wrote that book, you talked about protesters last week for the first time.
Yeah.
But how is the church basically relating to you now?
Incredibly positive.
Positive. Mostly positive.
Mostly. Way mostly positive. In every kind of tradition. Whether it's high church, low church, house church, no church,
Yeah.
And it is way, and the balance is way positive, because most people are not stuck inside really tightly wound religious paradigms, and enough to know that for a lot of them, this is the God, at least the beginning of a picture of the God they hoped was there, but religion had been telling them wasn't. So it's opened up all this dialogue and conversation. And that's really what the book has done. It's like the culture, even the church, but even outside in the secular community, and even in other religious traditions, everybody's been looking for a way to have a conversation about God that wasn't a dangerous one, inside
Yes.
religious constrictions. And the shack it's like it's given the culture a language to have that conversation. And suddenly people are having that conversation with people that they thought they knew, and finding out there's great sadness everywhere. And these questions are embedded in the hearts of people, and we have this desire for authenticity and forgiveness, but we don't know how to get there. And who is this God? And all of these issues are now becoming part of a conversation at the cultural level, which is, to me, absolutely astounding. I'm sitting on Good Morning America or the Today Show, and I'm you have to realize that I'm way out of my element. I mean, I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And yet, because I wrote a fictional story that's not been labeled Christian, I can talk about Jesus in the clearest, most overt
Exactly.
terms without anybody going, church, state, problem, you know, or any of that kind of stuff. It's like wide open because he's in the book, you know. And so the conversations in the secular media have been so unbelievably open. And the books are moving like 78,000 or more units a week through the secular marketplace.
Man, that's just crazy.
It's crazy. And it's, you know, I take no credit for the healing that's happening in this story. But I also take no credit for the controversy it's raising, because that's part of the healing process for some people.
You know, I read a quote yesterday that said, and I can't remember who said it, but he said, fiction is not fantasy, but it's a way to understand reality.
Yeah.
And that statement, I think, depicts your book. Because if you would have wrote a book, a non-fiction book, with those core concepts,
Yeah.
you probably would have been crucified for it.
Well, not only that, people wouldn't have read it. You know,
Exactly.
And because nonfiction is a presentation to the head, see, and we're in a culture in the West, particularly, where we believe in God with all of our heads, right?
Oh, that is really right.
And fiction and art and creativity and music and nature, all of those things bypass a lot of the restrictions at the intellectual level and hit us here.
On the right brain side too, right?
Well, exactly. And we forget that the brain is part of the damage.
Exactly.
You know? But that's where we want to live, especially in the West. And fiction has a way of just, it sneaks past, you know, and
that is so good.
and I think that's what's happening is that, and we know it from stories we've read. A lot of people read fiction because they want to hear something at the heart level and not just get something in the head.
Man, that's
And I think that it's breaking it. And I think what a lot of times, what the role of the Holy Spirit and what he does is drives the cross right into our heart that connects the head with the heart and
Yes.
brings the healing there.
and that is the goal, right? That we have the mind of Christ and the heart of God. A new
Absolutely.
heart and a new mind.
Absolutely. Because the heart is the soul, see,
That's
and it's
right.
the shack on the inside, right?
Yes.
It's the shack that people help us build, and we then build. It's the house on the inside where we store all of our addictions and all of our pain and all of our shame, and we hide all our secrets there. And at some point, you know, our concepts of God, which are stuck in the head, a lot of times prevent us from coming to healing, because as a person thinks in their heart, as a person thinks, so they are, right?
That's right.
Even if what you think is an absolute lie, you function as if it's real.
Yeah, you empower the lie.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, the $1 million question. Are you going to write another book?
If I'm alive and the Lord wills. Yeah, Kim's already told me what she wants, so I've already started. And so I've got 2 going right now, and another one sitting in the background. But one's fiction and one's a narrative autobiographical piece that talks about how did I get there, you know? What was the pain that's in the book, represented in the book? What's the process? Where did this come from? So maybe by next year. But see, the beauty of the shack is that I don't have to, I'm not under contract.
Yeah.
I don't have an identity
Yeah.
issue here. My identity is in Jesus, you know. And when I was praying in 2005, my prayer was, you know, Papa, I'm never going to ask you again to bless anything that I do. But if you got something you're blessing and it would be okay for me to be around that, I'd be all over it. And I don't care if I'm cleaning the toilets or shining the shoes or holding the door open. And I'm praying that at the same time I'm writing this story for my kids, you know. And that is, I'm in my 50s. I don't want to spend any more of my time trying to convince God to follow me.
Totally.
You know, I like this childlike reality in which I've got a relationship with an adult who knows what he's doing and who cares about me, and that I can trust, and let the adventure happen. So the book is part of that.
Do you think? Okay, so you wrote the book out of your own experience, really.
Correct.
There's so many metaphors in there about your experience, and basically it was that it's one of the ways that you were able to tell your story in a way that could be accepted and
not boring
and embraced.
Yeah. And and when you write fiction, or you're involved in that part of creativity, the potential is there for it to speak in ways that you never intended.
Like multi-dimensionally.
Yeah, or even like if somebody paints a picture and people are looking at it, they will see things that resonate with their own history, their own heart, in a way that you never intended.
Yes.
It's just like I get an email from this guy, and he says, I finally gave the book to this woman that I work with. I hesitated for a long time, and I didn't really know why. And then when I gave it to her, I pestered her for a week saying, what do you think? And finally she says to me, you have to understand, I can't read but a couple pages, and I fall apart. And he says, why don't you let God just in that place with you and see what he wants to do? He says, she comes back to my station a little while later, chewing on a mint and telling me how nauseous she is. And then she says, I want you to know something that nobody here knows. In 1998, my 3-year-old daughter was murdered in a campground by my then boyfriend, not the father, and she was wearing a red dress.
Whoa.
And you realize, why did I pick a red dress? It was just a color. Yet somebody down the road, that intercepted her life, and she said, this book was written just for me.
Wow.
And another piece, is I write the section, there's a section that Mackenzie has to deal with forgiveness. And one of the big issues for him is that God would have any consideration for the perpetrator. Because that's an issue.
Yeah, exactly.
And so he has to work that out. Well, what I didn't know would happen is that the book is now ripping through prisons. I mean, in major prisons, it is the #1 requested book in the history of those prisons. And incarcerated individuals are reading this book from the opposite side. They're reading it from the perpetrator's point of view. And they're listening to this section on forgiveness where God, Papa God, is arguing in a sense with Mackenzie about the value even of the perpetrator. And it's just opening up incredible kinds of dialogue. I didn't anticipate that. See, that's a God thing.
Do you think that this book is really a catalyst to a reformation in the church? I mean, you didn't write it for that purpose originally, but do you think that that's true?
I think it's part of whatever this is that the Holy Spirit's doing in the world. And because it's happening on a lot of different levels, and it is a part of it. It's giving some language to it, but there's a whole lot more going on than what this book is doing. And I'm glad. I'm grateful to be a part of it. I'm grateful that there was a partnering in order to even produce it, because I don't believe, like Karl Barth says, God will not be God apart from us. And I love that God, who is all relational, loves the partnering part of this.
Co-laboring.
Yeah. And so, I wrote it out of my crap, but at the same time, there was really a sense that I'm working on it together. It's flawed because I wrote it, and so, but yeah, there's a breath that's going across, and it's about grace, and it's about what is the fatherhood of God, because we got that so messed up, Even in Jesus' time, he says, no one knows the Father. Well, that hasn't changed much. And so those kinds of elements. The world is shrinking, information age, all of this.
Globalization.
We are living in a different place than even 10, 15 years ago.
Totally.
And as a result, this exchange of conversation and communication, and suddenly people are realizing how tired we are of religion, because it hasn't solved anything. It's only created more pain and problem.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've been sharing for a while is, statistically speaking, the cities that have the highest population density of Christians in America also have the worst social statistics.
Yep.
And so, what we're finding is that the religious world, the church, as we know it, or as we have known it, because I think we're in the midst of the greatest reformation in church history. I really do. And I think that your book's a catalyst to that. But the church as we know it has been highly ineffective in social transformation.
Well, it's sick, because it thought that if it could just do the right formula, and this is true with any religion,
Totally.
the path of trying to please the God, whatever the God is,
Yeah.
and whether it's 5 pillars of Islam, or 7 steps of Buddhist enlightenment, or 1,433,413 rules of Protestant evangelicalism, It's whatever the rules are. So you don't even need God, really. You just need to know what the rules are.
Yeah.
And you get locked into that. Everything becomes performance and judgment, because now you have a basis to judge how other people are doing the performance, all of that. There's a whole different path that's learning to trust God. And that path of learning to trust God involves implicitly relationship. There has to be a conversation. And you cannot trust anybody, let alone God, if you don't believe that God cares about you or loves you.
And so we lost relationship with the prince and embraced the principles.
Exactly. We substituted something alive for something dead.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not that we don't have core principles that we live by, but when we take those principles and those principles become our God, as opposed to an extension of our relationship with God, we end up with religion.
Well, relationship always involves mystery and a loss of control.
And that's scary.
But principles, man, I can control them. They don't. There's no mystery to them. As long as they can be in black and white, and I got them.
Tell me the rules.
Yep. Tell me the rules, and then I can beat somebody else over the head because of their inability.
It's kind of, don't you think, a little Galatians 3-ish?
It's Galatians 3. It's Romans 5, 6, 7, and 8. It's smack in the heart. Where the law comes, sin abounds.
Exactly.
And that's what you're saying about the institutional system has not moved us toward relationship, has moved us towards law.
Yes.
And as a result, it has just damaged us to the core.
And then as Christians, we want to judge other people who don't know God yet.
Yeah.
We haven't been able to keep our own rules that we've made.
Yeah.
And then we want to make judgments about people
Absolutely.
who don't even know, who don't have any relationship with God, as to the rules that they're not keeping.
We take on the character of the God that we worship.
Exactly. Become like the one you worship.
We believe that God is angry, disappointed, distant, disgusted, and we turn that right around and we become just like that.
Yeah, we facilitate the God that we think that He is.
Yeah.
And well, that's powerful. Yesterday or a couple of days ago, Pastor Bill Johnson was just sharing a private moment that he had with the Lord. He said, I never intended to share this. He said, I've been sitting on it for a few weeks, but I feel like I'm supposed to. He said that he had this private moment where the Lord said to him, thank you for telling people how good I am. Man.
That pierces me.
That's a powerful statement.
It's like a friend of mine, after being in a conference for a whole weekend listening to all the same old covenant religious stuff, he was asked to pray, and the first thing he said, Jesus, please forgive us for how we have abused your Father's reputation.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
He dies on a cross to save the world, not to judge the world. And then, for some reason, it becomes our job to judge the world.
I know.
It's a weird paradigm.
It is, and that's the way religion is. It's about power and control.
Yep.
And you're right. You can go to all the statistics, and whatever religion it is, whether it's Christianity or something else, but whatever it is, if it's got highly devised legalisms and principles, you'll find the addiction rates are through the roof, everything else. And I've got this section in one of the chapters where Jesus says, Mackenzie, you know what? I didn't come to make people Christians because I'm not one. Right? And that's got me in a little problems. But he's not. He was born a Jew, he was raised a Jew, he died a Jew, he rose from the dead a Jew, he ascended a Jew. He wasn't like 30 years later going, if I'd have just hung around a while, I could have become a Christian, And
it's such a crazy statement.
Yeah.
I mean, just the way it stimulates your thinking, right?
Yeah, well, he didn't come up to set up a new religion that competes with the other ones. He came to destroy religion, period, by introducing relationship and opening up relationship. And people ask me if I'm a Christian, and I go, well, why don't you tell me what one is, and I'll tell you if I'm one of those, because I don't mind being one.
Yeah.
But I'm a Canadian. I'm not a Republican.
Yeah. So people will be upset with me if I don't ask you. You're writing, I think 3 books. You said 2 books for sure.
Yeah.
What are they kind of about?
Well, one's the autobiographical narrative.
Okay, so that one is your story, basically, right?
Yep. And that's one Kim wants me to do next, and a lot of people have asked for that. The other one is another fiction, and it's not a sequel. It runs across the shack in a very minor sort of way.
Is
but,
God still a black woman in the...
Well, we'll see. Who knows?
You haven't quite got it all figured out yet.
Oh,
I
no,
can
no,
see,
no.
right?
It's a work in progress.
Yeah.
But, again, you know what? I want to be involved in things that God's blessing, not trying to convince him that my ideas are good enough to be blessed.
So it's not a sequel at all?
No.
So it doesn't...
It would take like Gabriel come and visit me for a sequel, I think. I don't want to touch the shack, you know.
So it doesn't have the same characters in it or anything, actually, then?
No. It may have some of the same... I mean, there may be a conversation that takes place on a dock near a cabin, and we'll see.
Got it.
Yeah.
Do you... I had a question in my mind I was just going to ask you. How do you write? Like, when you wrote The Shack, did you sit down... Because I'm a writer myself, and so I get asked this all the time. Like, did you have it all kind of worked out? I know you wouldn't have the details worked out.
Nothing. I had nothing.
So you wrote chapter 1, or
Nope.
you wrote a chapter?
What I did was I was riding the train to get to one of my jobs, and it was 40 minutes each way. And I started by writing the conversations, just conversations. And these conversations became alive. These conversations involved questions that I'd been asking God all my whole life. And I was drawing from conversations with friends or family or whatever. And I was just writing them down. And finally, I got to the place in May of '05 where I thought, man, I'm going to lose all these things because they're on yellow legal pads and the backs of napkins and whatever, you know. So I put them into the computer, and as I did that, I'm asking, okay, I want a story. So who's asking this and why? And the storyline just bloomed around the conversations. And as the story moved, the conversation just got dropped in. It was, you know what, from start to finish, it was less than 6 months, and I was working 3 jobs. And
you wrote that book in 6 months?
Yeah.
Oh, and working 3 jobs?
Uh-huh. And going through a lot of stuff in our lives personally, too.
So you did not know where that book was going?
Mm-mm.
So you were just kind of like every day you'd sit and write?
Whenever I got a chance. And it wasn't every day. I had one day where Kim was gone with the kids. I had no jobs that day. And it was a Saturday. And I started at 8 in the morning, and 8.5 hours later, I'd written 4 complete chapters. And I was like stepping outside and getting swept by a river. And the 4th of them is 15, which is Festival of Friends. And that chapter is in the book the way I wrote it the day I wrote it. It's never been touched in a rewrite.
Wow.
It was the 4th of those 4. And I told Kim when she came home that night, I said, I just got swept downstream like 25 miles and spat out bleeding and naked. I mean, it just ripped me that whole day. But, you know, I guess the Lord knew that I didn't have a lot of time, so he had to pile it in.
Now, you started to talk about a movie right in the beginning of our interview.
Yes.
Is there a movie coming out, The Shack? Or
very possibly. We're taking it very, very slowly. You know, the last thing we need is another movie that gets left behind, you know. And sorry.
That was a play on words.
A little bit, yes. And but the interest is phenomenal.
Is there somebody interested in the movie where the movie wouldn't be a B movie?
Correct. Yeah. I mean,
I'm sorry.
Absolutely. It will never hit the screen if it was a B movie.
Yeah.
Because the language that's used around it and the interest is that it could be a cultural legacy, this piece. We have he calls himself a borderline agnostic atheist, one of the biggest producers out of Europe. And he flies from London to LA and back every week. And he called us after a trip that on the way from London to LA, he read the Atheist Manifesto. And on the way from
he wrote the Atheist Manifesto.
He read it, yeah. And on the way back from LA to London, he just grabs a book out of the bookstore at the airport, and it's The Shack. And he calls us, and he says, I think I'm still a borderline agnostic atheist, but I've never had an experience like this in my life. He said, I wept from LA to London. And he said, I can only tell you this. I don't want to die before I get to be on the set, even if I'm holding the lights, to see this turn into a film.
Man.
Yeah. So, I mean, the level of interest is just astounding. And you know, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, do you really want a movie made? You know, and if you do, how? And just taking it a day at a time and a conversation at a time. But it's slowly coalescing, and we'll see what happens.
I believe the cathedrals of yesterday and the town squares of 100 years ago are really the movies of today. Like that's where people go to actually develop their belief systems.
Yeah.
And so this movie could incite a revolution.
It definitely could. And again, you know, the way things happen with the book is that the Lord really was clear about walking and not running. And I want to be in that same frame of mind when it comes to the movie as well.
You could, I hope that you'll take this in the way I mean it. You could very easily be prostituted right
Absolutely.
now. And you're completely aware
I'm
of that.
surrounded by a huge layer of wonderful, beautiful people who are guarding that very thing.
Yeah.
And
somebody once said that when you get successful, you'll have false friends and true enemies.
Yeah.
And I know that you know that to be true.
I do.
I want to kind of end with one more question, because that book creates lots of questions in people who don't know you.
Yeah.
And i.e. me.
Yeah.
And you're out of everything that I've heard, not just from this interview, but from lots of people, some who know you, you're not anti-church or anti-Christianity.
I love the church.
Yes.
I'm anti all the damage that institutional systems do.
Exactly.
And I don't care what kind they are, religious, political, economic, whatever. And to me, it's not about having a revolution that overthrows the systems. It's about how the revolution comes from people who are fully human. You know, how do we be in it and not of it? Because,
Exactly.
you know, the systems are the systems. They're just going to replace one with another one.
Sure.
And so, you know, when it comes to the fundamental questions is, you know, what is the Holy Spirit saying to you?
Exactly.
You know, if it's to be a part of a community of faith of this particular bent, then be there. And if you're there because the Holy Spirit is asking you to be there, it's probably not to be a thorn in their flesh or to be an antagonist, right? So let's grow up, and the systems unfortunately have kept people as babies.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, it's one of the things I appreciate about what Bill does.
Yeah.
He's about people growing into the full measure and stature of Jesus.
That's right.
You know, and so no, I love the bride. I
Yeah.
do, and I am fully supportive. I'm inside. This is funny. My friends think this is hilarious because I'm probably inside institutional churches more than anybody they know.
Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
even coming from a little bit of a,
Totally.
you know, so it's sweet. You know, iron sharpens iron if the angle's right. You know.
Oh, there you go. And the last question I have for you, maybe should have been asked a lot earlier, but do you have leaders in your life that you admire?
Oh, absolutely. And who are theologically sound, whether they're people that I read or people that I'm in actual relationship with. You know, people.
Who are
like,
a couple of those people?
Baxter Kruger would be one.
Uh-huh.
And he's at thegreatdance.org, which is all Trinitarian out of Aberdeen. Well, he actually lives in Mississippi. Malcolm Smith, who was a guy who taught grace and faith. Ken Blue is another guy. People like your pastor, people like Bill that I read, and people that I'm constantly. And then there's a lot of dead guys and women that I read too that have really had an influence, whether it's Jacques Ellul or whether it's someone like Kierkegaard or Karl
Do you love
Barth.
to read?
I do. I love to read, but I tend to read the stuff that nobody else will tackle. You know, it's stuff where you have to wade through concrete, but you find diamonds everywhere. You know,
I'm the exact opposite. If I get into one of those books, I'm like 4 pages into it. I'm like, that's probably a great book, but I do not have the patience to read that.
I understand it, but those are the people that, you know, and I feel very carried, not by just the community of faith that's around me and the layers of relationship and the intercessors and all that kind of stuff, but I feel very carried by people who are involved in what the Shack is doing. They feel a part of it.
They do.
This is a grassroots thing. It's their stories they're telling. It's their relationships that they're interacting with, and those people are praying for me. They're praying for my family. They're praying for what's going on, and I feel very carried.
Is there anything you'd like to say as we close? Is there any last comments that you would like to say?
Probably that, you know, I find myself in the middle of this whirlwind that to me is just the grace of God. And we know, those of us who really understand, I think, what God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are all about, we know there are no pedestals in the kingdom.
That's right.
You know, I'm proof that he still uses the foolish, you know. And
Who have become wise in another way.
yeah, I think so. And age and time hopefully will do that for us all.
That's right.
And pain and process.
That's right.
And I'm just grateful to be a part of this for, you know, but whether I'm in the middle of something like this or whether I'm shipping out the soldering tips, it's not what you do that makes you significant.
Exactly.
It's whose you are and who you're loved by and in whose image you're made. And you cannot do anything to add to any of that.
That is so
And then we
awesome.
have a God who pursues us to heal us.
That is so awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for the interview.
It's
probably
been
one of
great.
the most interesting interviews I've ever done.
That's
And
awesome.
God bless you.
And blessings on you and what you're doing.
And thank you for what you're doing for the church, too.
Oh,
We
man.
love you. We are so excited
Thank
that
you.
you're here.
I'm thrilled to be here.
Awesome. All right.